Hey everybody! So whether you are reading with us through the Bible or not, I hope today's video will be interesting and illuminating for you. And if you are reading with us through the Bible, then you know that we are almost toward the end of the book of Numbers, which is the fourth book of the Old Testament. And in Numbers chapter 21, there's this really strange story involving snakes and healing via a snake lifted on a pole. This is actually one of my favorite stories in the book of Numbers because it's a clear example of how reading through the Bible works, which is why I'm going to draw attention to it. So reading through the Bible is kind of like MC Escher's drawing called Drawing Hands, where they're like drawing each other. And it's hard for me to describe it better than that, but essentially the more you read the Bible, the more you understand what you've read. So you can't really understand the Bible reading it just once, but you begin to understand its meaning as you read it over and over and over again. It interacts with itself just by the nature of the literary ninjas, basically, who wrote it. So I hope you can kind of understand and get to see that as I unpack this example. And if you think that I'm overreaching with different parts of the symbolism that I'm talking about, just message me. A lot of that's just because I'm trying to be concise with time. But it's all there. So the context for Numbers 21 is that the Israelites, they are on the march toward the Promised Land from camping out on Mount Sinai for a while, and they've seen God's miraculous power of provision a multitude of times, but they and the new generation are still bent on complaining. And so here's the passage. They, the Israelites, traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt," where they were in slavery, "to die in the wilderness? There's no bread, there's no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them, and they bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. Okay, so this is really strange, right? We're familiar now with God's judgment and how he forgives through the sacrificial system and through the prayers of intercessors like Moses and the priests. But why are there snakes, and why are people healed by looking at a snake on a pole? So to get that, we need to get back to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 3, the story coined the fall. So you probably know the story, right? There's a very strange creature, and it was strange to the Israelites too. It was a talking snake. And the snake tempted Eve to disobey God and to abandon God's definition of what good and evil were and to redefine it for herself. And she takes the bait. So the Bible thus says that basically the venom of sin infected her and infected the human race. So in Numbers 21, the snakes, as commentators would agree, represent sin, that disobedience against God, that rebellion, and its offspring of sin bred among the Israelites, those multitude of snakes. It had infected the Israelites with its venom, and the bites of the snakes represent the infection that is already present within them. Okay. So then, why is there a snake on a pole? That's our next question. Well, in the Gospel according to John, in the New Testament, in chapter 3, Jesus is talking with a religious leader named Nicodemus, and he seemingly randomly says to him, "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man," who Jesus refers to himself as, "must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him." Okay. All right, so we learned that later on in the gospel, lifted up means Jesus being crucified, being lifted up and nailed to a pole. So how does that connect? Well, in the wilderness, the means for being healed of the venom of the snake was solely to look at the snake on the pole. So why wouldn't you if you were infected with the venom? Well, perhaps you didn't believe that you had disobeyed God, like many of us don't today. Or perhaps you didn't trust that God could or would heal you just by looking at something on a pole, which a lot of people in like other sorts of religions maybe believe that's just too simple. Perhaps you didn't want to acknowledge that you messed up. Yet to look at that snake was a means of humbling yourself and acknowledging, yeah, I've messed up. This venom is inside me, as it is in everyone else, and I need help. I need a rescuer, and I can't do it myself. And I'm going to acknowledge that I've messed up by just looking up and looking at the snake and identifying my own snake-like tendencies with it. So it's similar with Jesus. In Genesis 3, there's a prophecy about someone who is going to crush the head of the serpent, representative of sin, and as the serpent bruises that person's heel. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at Jesus, you can see. He said that he came to take away our mistakes, the times that we have deliberately and accidentally disobeyed God. He says essentially, you can't rescue yourself, but I'm going to let myself become a snake. I'm going to take upon all the sin and the wickedness that infects the world, all of the venom that's inside of you, and I'm going to let the venom of the snake bite me and kill me and allow myself to look like a wicked snake to God and endure all of his judgment for sin so that you don't have to. I'm going to become the snake. The only thing that you have to do is what the Israelites had to do. Look up. And acknowledge that you've messed up sometimes, intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, and let Jesus, who lived a perfect life, impart his perfect life to you while he takes upon your imperfections. So if you do that, and he'll endure the punishment, and there, you're free. He's the antidote, if only you'll look at him and believe. So I know that in our culture we get kind of uncomfortable with the idea of sin, and I'd love to talk about that another time, but this is just an example in Numbers 21 where we go to 3 different chapters in the Bible, and a lot more that I didn't mention, but even just those 3 reveal much more about how this confusing text about snakes is really about the gospel of Jesus. So if you have questions about that, let me know. So if you have already read through the Bible, or some of the New Testament, pay attention as you read the seemingly confusing and minute details of the Old Testament for how the rest of the Bible illuminates its deeper meanings. And if you are reading through the Bible for the first time, also, pay attention to these confusing and seemingly minute details. Hold on to them and wait expectantly for much of what seemed to be nonsense to become rich in meaning the more and more you read. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I look forward to doing the next video. Awesome. Bye.